I remember being a kid in the late 1980s and early 90s and watching MacGyver as the series originally aired, when each new episode was an unknown. The show's central premise was so loose and flexible that you had no idea what to expect going in. Would this week's episode be a TV-sized action movie where MacGyver sneaks into a hostile country to rescue a political prisoner, or the pilot of a downed experimental aircraft? Would it be a social issue show where MacGyver confronts, say, the evils of recreational inhalants? They never actually did that one, but they should have. The United States of my childhood was a barren wasteland populated by hollow-eyed moon gas huffers, just a nation of wandering Frank Booths we were. It was horrific. And also hilarious in a very specific way that we all felt really guilty about. When sitting down to watch a new MacGyver episode, you never knew exactly what you were in for, but there were 3 guarantees that the episode you were about to watch was going to be a good one. Penny Parker, Murdoch, and Jack Dalton. I've talked about Penny and Murdoch episodes in previous videos in this series, and I'll talk about more of each in the future, have no doubt, but I was a bit surprised to realize that after making 14 of these MacGyver videos, I'd never paid much attention to Jack. So allow me to correct that oversight, starting right now. Jack Dalton, played by dependable character actor and frequent mustache haver Bruce McGill, appears in 18 episodes of MacGyver across 6 of the show's 7 seasons, more appearances than any other recurring character. Jack is MacGyver's best friend. The benefit to this situation for Jack is always being able to drag MacGyver along whenever he needs help with his latest cockamamie scheme, and Jack is nothing if not a prolific innovator in the field of cockamamie schemes. The benefit of this situation to MacGyver is not clear. We meet Jack Dalton in episode 6 of season 2 of MacGyver in the fittingly titled Jack of Lies, where he shows up to ask for MacGyver's help, but not with a cockamamie scheme. Oh no, for a rescue mission to one of the seemingly infinite number of troubled Central American countries that served as settings for early MacGyver episodes. It's interesting how action-adventure shows like MacGyver reflected the politics of their time even when they weren't meaning to. If all you knew about the state of the world in the 1980s came from American primetime television, you wouldn't have many facts, but you would definitely get the accurate impression that people in the United States sure thought that shit was majorly fucked up in Central America. Anyway, Jack contacts MacGyver to ask for his help in the way I'm sure most of your friends would choose to reach out for such a request. He breaks into MacGyver's apartment, steals all of MacGyver's stuff, and leaves a note telling MacGyver to come and get his stuff, which is piled up in an airplane hangar. I had a friend from college do that to me just last week. Ironically, he wanted me to help him move. After Mac arrives at the hangar, Jack announces himself, crouched in the rafters, then gives an already irritated MacGyver one last scare by pretending to fall off the rafter, only for it to turn out Jack had his feet safely tied to a rope. He cackles with delight as a startled MacGyver rushes over to help him. Oh, that Jack Dalton! What a guy. It's actually a really deft bit of characterization. The episode is 5 minutes old at this point, and with some voiceover exposition from MacGyver and this stunt from Jack, it feels like Jack's character is fully established already. There's still a lot we don't know about him, but we have a good sense of who he is and what he's all about, even though we've only spent a few seconds with him. Since the last time MacGyver saw him, whenever that was, Jack, who is a pilot, by the way, that's important, has started his own private freight business, Fly By Night, which MacGyver immediately and correctly assumes to be a front for a smuggling operation. Jack says he was recently picking up some orchids in the Central American nation of Denoto when the botanist who was flying with him was kidnapped. Now, Jack needs MacGyver's help to fly back down there and rescue the botanist. Mac refuses, but Jack presses the issue. He needs Mac's help, and time is running out because the thing is, Jack is dying. MacGyver is skeptical of this too, but Jack has this tic where whenever he lies, his left eye twitches. When he tells MacGyver that he's dying, there's no twitch. So MacGyver agrees, and off they go in Jack's plane to Denoto. On the flight down, MacGyver finds some old snapshots of himself, Jack, and their mutual friend Mike from when they traveled around Europe after college. Jack's like, yeah, the good old days. Hey, random thought, wouldn't it be great if me, you, and Mike could get together for one last adventure? But I'm sure that'll never happen. Funnily enough, when Jack tells MacGyver that he hasn't seen Mike in a long time, that left eye of his starts twitching. By the way, Mike is the same Mike from that episode, The Widowmaker, that I reviewed a couple of videos back in this series. The mountain climbing episode with Murdoch, remember? This episode takes place before that one, obviously, because Mike isn't lying dead as dog meat with every bone shattered at the foot of a mountain. And also, she's played by Patricia McPherson, who was also Bonnie in Knight Rider. Isn't that fun? They land in Denoto, and just as Jack is reassuring MacGyver about how smoothly this whole operation is about to go, the local police show up to greet them on the runway. Jack fills MacGyver in that the botanist they have to rescue was actually abducted by the police, so that's a little more complicated. Also, the police are chasing after the plane and shooting, which isn't ideal. Jack tries to shake the cops by releasing an oil slick onto the runway, which is a thing his plane can do, but that doesn't work. So, MacGyver's an explosive using an air tank and slingshots it underneath one of the police jeeps, flipping the jeep over and ending the pursuit. As Jack and MacGyver fly off, down on the runway, this Miami Vice-looking guy is upset about how all of this is going so far, but the head cop, Antonez, is like, hey, relax. They aren't leaving the country without that botanist they came for. We'll get what we need from them, and then we'll kill Jack Dalton. Jack and MacGyver land in a pasture near a hideout of Jack's. Mac notices a bullet hole in the plane's wing that's leaking fuel and plugs it with a stick. At his hideout, which is kind of an airplane graveyard, Jack shows MacGyver the orchids he was hired to smuggle out of the country. Underneath one of the flowers, at the bottom of the pot, is a bag of heroin. The Miami Vice guy, his name is Sonny, apparently, so shit, they weren't even being subtle about it, were they? Is a drug smuggler, and he stashed the heroin in the orchids. When Jack found out, he refused to fly the orchids back to the U.S. because Jack Dalton ain't no drug smuggler, at least not for what they were paying him. So that's when Sonny and Antonez, who were in cahoots, abducted Mike. Oh yeah, in a shocking twist, the botanist Jack brought with him to Denoto was their old friend Mike. We check in on Mike briefly. She's being held in an old monastery by Antonez and Sonny, and I'll just say this, they are not treating her well. She's like, you'll be sorry when my friends at the Knight Foundation find out about this. The Phoenix Foundation, I meant to say. Sorry, forgot which one this was for a second. MacGyver and Jack go into town that night and ask for information at a bar where Jack has friends, but the local cops recognize Jack. After a brief chase, Jack allows the cops to arrest him to allow MacGyver to get away. They throw Jack in with Mike at the monastery, and he's like, don't worry, we'll get out of this situation, no problem. I brought MacGyver, and he'll save us for sure. It's his show. Right, but it's not our show. We could still get killed. Nah, forget it, Mike. They'd never kill you. MacGyver sneaks into the old monastery thanks to a clever misdirect where it looks like he's hiding inside a coffin being carried into the monastery by some monks, but he's actually hiding underneath the cart that carried the coffin when Antonez is machine gunning the coffin to make sure whoever's in it is really dead and not trying to sneak into the monastery. MacGyver slips away and sneaks into the monastery. He locates Jack and Mike, and the three of them head for the door. Once outside, MacGyver hotwires an old truck using the foil from an old cigarette pack, as you do, and they drive away as Antonez and Sonny shoot after them. MacGyver, Jack, and Mike make it back to Jack's plane, but Antonez's goons show up not long after. Jack says it's just as well. Thanks to the fuel leak, he guesses his plane could only make it about 5 miles after taking off. So their options would be flying 5 miles to crash into the mountains, or flying 5 miles to crash into the ocean. MacGyver hatches a plan. He sends Jack off to lure Antonez to the junkyard, then sets a trap using the propeller of one of the old planes, a wine-powered battery, and a tarp on the end of a rope. The trap works, but only halfway. When Antonez and Sonny show up, Mac triggers the propeller, which pulls the rope and catches Sonny up in the tarp, but Antonez is still free and holds Mac, Jack, and Mike at gunpoint. So Jack makes a noble sacrifice. He steps forward and offers to fly Antonez and the heroin away in exchange for letting MacGyver and Mike go safely. MacGyver tries to talk Jack out of it, knowing that his plane is destined to crash after only a few miles, but the way Jack sees it, he's dying anyway, so why not give his life saving his friends? He kisses Mike goodbye, and does not kiss MacGyver goodbye, I see how it is, and flies away with Antonez. MacGyver runs after them to try and stop Jack from going through with it, but he's too late. and can only watch as his friend disappears into the sky. In the epilogue, MacGyver, Mike, and Pete are at Mac's apartment helping him put back all the stuff Jack took in the beginning. Pete gets off the phone with someone and he's like, "Well, Antonez washed up on shore. He was still alive and the authorities arrested him as soon as they saw him. He'll probably go to prison since he was still clutching that big bag of heroin when they found him." The authorities have found no sign of Jack or the plane. But Pete tells MacGyver and Mike that Antonez says he bailed out of the plane after both engines started smoking. MacGyver chuckles like, "Ha ha, good old Jack, always with a trick up his sleeve." Mike's like, "What?" "Well, you know Jack. He always had a plan. He told us that his plane only had 5 miles of gas left. But what if that wasn't true? Didn't you see the fuel leaking from the plane after you landed, though?" "Well, yeah, but I mean, he did that trick on the runway with the oil slick earlier, so the fuel leak and the smoking engines that Antonez saw could have just been ploys to make us think the plane was doomed to go down." I feel like you're reaching a little on this one. You're reaching! You are! Jack is alive! He's alive! Do you hear? Alive! I don't know how you got there, Mac, but hey, if it makes you happy, then sure. Jack had a plan and he faked his own death. Feel better? Good. Also, I mean, it turns out MacGyver is right. Jack is still alive, and he returns for a bunch more episodes, starting with Dalton, Jack of Spies, later on in season 2, and the show is all the better for it, but I still have no clue how MacGyver is supposed to have deduced it from the news that both engines of Jack's plane were smoking. But whatever. It's MacGyver, who gives a shit? With all due respect to Mike, and as a Knight Rider fan, it is a genuine pleasure to see Patricia McPherson just sort of pop up for an episode like this. Her character doesn't have much to do other than be a hostage and then be an object of affection for both of our heroic dudes. The real key to the success of this episode is Jack. Aside from his presence, this is a standard issue early run MacGyver outing. Sneaking into a hostile foreign country, infiltrating an enemy compound, rescuing a prisoner. In the first few seasons of the show, the producers were stamping out episodes like this one on a regular basis, which is not to say those episodes are bad. I mean, they're bad. It's MacGyver, but most of them are also entertaining and fun to watch. They do kind of run together, though. It can be difficult to distinguish one from another in my memory, and I've seen them all a bunch of times. This episode, though, is easy to remember. It's got the same plot as a dozen or more others, but it's also our introduction to Jack, and just having him around gives the whole proceeding a different energy. Jack Dalton is, in many ways, the ideal recurring character for a show like MacGyver. He's entertaining in his own right, strong enough to carry his weight, dramatically speaking, in his episodes, but he never seems like he should have his own show. Jack's appeal lies not only in himself, but in how he interacts with MacGyver, and how those interactions change how MacGyver acts, and how we see him. MacGyver is usually flying by the seat of his pants, just barely keeping ahead of whatever threat he's dealing with. That's inherent to the character. But when Jack's around, MacGyver has the additional responsibility of having to be the adult in the room.
I know I said I was gonna slug him, but how do you hit a kid?
It's not that Jack is exclusively a burden on MacGyver. In this episode and his subsequent appearances, Jack shows himself to be brave, resourceful, and quite clever in his own right. But he's also reckless and impulsive and overconfident and a little greedy. So whenever he's around, part of MacGyver's job is always making sure Jack doesn't suddenly dart out into oncoming traffic. He's a rascal. That's what he is. He has all of those childlike qualities I mentioned, and he can't really be trusted. He feeds MacGyver multiple lines of bullshit in this episode. He lies about Mike being the botanist they're rescuing. He leaves out the bit about the heroin hidden in the orchids. He leaves out the bit about how their enemy is the police force of this Central American country. Shit, he drags MacGyver into this in the first place by breaking into his apartment, stealing all of his stuff, and forcing him to come and get it. It's easy to imagine MacGyver hearing an ominous music sting in his head whenever he comes home to find a message from Jack on his answering machine. I recently did a video over on my Trek Actually series about the character of Loxana Troi from Star Trek The Next Generation and how she's, awful. Superficially, she and Jack Dalton have a lot in common. They're both recurring characters. They're both chaotic, destabilizing presences. They both make life more difficult for the main characters, and they both behave in some very questionable ways, but I would argue that in contrast to Loaxana, Jack Dalton is an example of how this sort of character should be done. Where the creators of TNG got it wrong with Loaxana, the creators of MacGyver got it right with Jack. He is exasperating to MacGyver, but endearing to us. He is funny. He does upset the balance of MacGyver's life, but in a way that makes the show more interesting. And while we understand why MacGyver might want to knock the shit out of Jack on occasion, we don't actually want to see him do that. None of this would work without Bruce McGill. Played by another actor, as written, I think Jack would be insufferable. Even with McGill on hand, there are moments when Jack comes perilously close to crossing over from delightful scamp to exhausting jerk, but McGill always manages to pull it back somehow. He's just such a naturally charming and watchable actor. He has the essential ability to remain likable even while he's doing clearly inappropriate stuff, and his chemistry with Richard Dean Anderson is incredible.
Charts! Shouldn't we be using charts?
What's the name on the plane, Mac?
Fly by night.
Exactly.
The chemistry mostly comes through in the comedic moments. MacGyver and Jack, Anderson and McGill make for an outstanding double act, squabbling like siblings, MacGyver frequently blowing his top after catching Jack in yet another manipulative lie or self-serving omission. But there's also a genuine friendship between the two. And that comes across just as clearly as their amusing antagonism.
You're the only real friend I've got, Mac.
So why didn't you just tell me the whole story?
Right, sure. Drugs, blackmail, corrupt police. Sounds like a bad TV show.
Yeah, you want to know how it ends?
They all live happily ever after?
The episode works as well as it does because of Bruce McGill and his chemistry with Richard Dean Anderson, but the rest of the cast deserves a tip of the hat as well because everyone knows their job and does what they need to do. I already mentioned Patricia McPherson as Mike. I really wish she had had more of consequence to do here, but at least it's nice to see her. Maybe that's why she was cast. The producers knew Mike was an important character in theory, being MacGyver and Jack's old friend, but also knew she didn't really pop in the script, so they got someone recognizable to most of their audience to play her, hoping she'd at least make an impression that way. Just a guess on my part. Dana Elcar as Pete Thornton, MacGyver's boss and other best friend, only has 2 scenes here, that epilogue at the end where he's just there for exposition, and this scene earlier on where it's just him in his office talking on the phone. With very little time and not much to work with, Elcar manages to convey Pete's disapproval of Jack, which helps with Jack's characterization as well as Pete's, and the script does give Elcar a humorous beat to play, as MacGyver chides Pete about his diet right as he's about to chow down on a burger. As Antonez, the main heavy, we get Gregory Sierra, a familiar face to anyone who loves 1970s and 80s American TV, though he continued to remain active up until a few years before his death in 2021. He's probably best remembered as Julio in Sanford and Son, a versatile performer who could hold his own in comedy as well as drama. He shows up 3 times in MacGyver, playing different yet similar characters every time. He's always a villainous cop or military officer in some Latin American country. It sounds like typecasting, and if you look at his filmography beyond the MacGyver appearances, it does seem like he got called a lot when they needed someone to portray a disreputable brown-skinned person. But he also played doctors and more heroic law enforcement types, and even a Cardassian in an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Like every other character who isn't MacGyver or Jack, Antonez doesn't have a whole lot to do here. He's a stock villain in a stock plot. At least Sierra gets a foil of his own to work with, though not one as memorable as Jack Dalton. The scumbag drug dealer guy, Sonny, played by another veteran 80s TV character actor, Kevin Major Howard. Sonny is a heroin dealer, but Howard plays him in such a way as to suggest that cocaine is his personal drug of choice. Well, hey, it's the 80s, so at least he's got plenty of company. Howard spent the 1980s popping up in mostly small roles in lots of TV shows and even a few films. He's in Sudden Impact, the 4th Dirty Harry movie. He's the guy Harry snatches up and tells him he's nothing but dog shit. Isn't that fun? And he's in Full Metal Jacket. And I'm very happy to say that 2 years after this episode of MacGyver aired, Howard was in an episode of Miami Vice. I hope he used this episode of MacGyver as his audition tape. So yeah, this one is the MacGyver and Jack show, which is fine by me because I'm a big fan of that show. I'm not sure if the decision to bring Jack back from the dead was made before, during, or after the production of this episode. I can see the producers intending for Jack to be a one-off guest character, then watching this episode and thinking, God damn, we gotta have him back, and adding that epilogue to keep the door open. I can also see it going the opposite way, with Jack's return being part of the plan all along. Jack Dalton seems like exactly the kind of guy to tell his best friend he's dying, then sacrifice himself to save his friends' lives, and then show up a few months later alive and well and knee-deep in some brand new bullshit he needs help getting out of. We should all be so lucky to have a friend like that. And also, most of us are lucky that we don't.